Good morning, folks. We are live, and I am in a different room today because my family is sleeping. Um, so, having more difficulties today that we had last week. I think I'm sounding a little froggy. I apologize. And I apologize for the mix-up. Um, anyway, we'll have Dave on as soon as we can. But I thought today I would, in lieu of that, I would I would read to you my short story, Cryos Jade. It's the first in a short story series of probably 6 to 7 short stories that tie into the main universe of of the Half-Orc Saga. If you'd like to purchase those, they're on. The first 3 are on Amazon. Um, only $1 each, so go pick them up. And once I'm done with the series, the characters will be folded into the main continuity of Half-Orc Saga, and I'll make a box set of the short stories. I'll make a 1-volume edition, or I should say. It's not really a box set because they're short stories. Anyway, um, so this is the first story, Cryos Jade. The rest of them have subtitles, but this one only has Cryos Jade. Let me know what you think, and if you'd like me to add a subtitle or anything that you find interesting. Ixtus the Black, the dread of Thorl Island, was dead. That's what Jade told herself, standing before the black walls of his abandoned keep. The king and the people still feared the forest because of it. The king forbade any to enter the forest, saying the place was cursed. Cursed. That's what she was. Cursed to a life of drudgery and monotony, but she listened to their fears. That's why she came here, to free herself. I don't think I can screen share. I'm sorry to interrupt the flow of the narrative. Maybe I can screen share. There we go, screen share. There we go, okay. That's why she came here, to free herself. Her heart pounded in her chest. Her hand fiddled with the satchel at her side and adjusted the jade dagger beneath her belt. She didn't believe in the curse. Didn't believe that it had killed the queen. Didn't believe she could die simply by being here. Why then was she trembling? It took an effort to push the fear aside, but she swallowed and raised a shaking hand. The touch of the door brought the reality of what she was about to do, and she shuddered. She took a moment to gather her courage, and then pushed open the door. It swung open without a sound. Her stomach lurched at the rank smell of mold and rot that blew past her, as though a ghoul had opened its maw to consume her. She gagged and covered her mouth. The hall stretched before her like an ancient tomb. A trailing thought of turning back ran through her mind. She tightened her grip on her torch, and clenched her free hand into a fist as she forced her legs to carry her forward. The dancing light revealed walls covered in mold and cobwebs. Some she was forced to cut away with a dagger. Her movements were halting. Crushing dread seized her heart and grew the further she ventured. She took in a breath she didn't realize she was holding. It was harder to breathe in here. She came to another door at the end of the hall, also covered with mold. Pulling a fine silk handkerchief from the sleeve of her tunic, she pushed the door open. The cruel, menacing faces of 100 gargoyle statues glared at her. Their clawed hands reached out and clutched her on every side. She screamed as they dragged her deep into darkness blacker than the keep. Pain pierced through her body. She felt their teeth as they feasted. She shook herself as she reeled from the vision. Blinking, she saw only the still statues reaching out for her, frightening though they were. Her heart raced. Her blood thumped in her ears. An attempted swallow caught in her throat, her mind screaming at her to run. Steady. You've trained for this. Don't let it win. You can do this. You have to do this. You want to go back to an empty life with nothing to show for it? With shaking limbs, she stepped into the chamber. Stone eyes lingered on her, making her skin crawl, as she waded through the sea of statues. The vision constantly tugged at her mind, like a whisper just beyond hearing. The touch of her hand to the object beneath her jerkin, centered on her chest, steadied her. Nothing stirred. No sound but her footsteps and her own choked breathing disturbed the silence. As she moved through the room, the statues always faced her, though she never saw them moving. Memory of what she had learned from the stories kept her careful to avoid their touch. Through an arch into an adjacent hall, she sighed, feeling the eyes in the vision leave her. She smiled. I did it. She turned back to the gargoyle room, and her smile fled. The gargoyles had turned their backs on her, somehow unnerving her more than their stares. She swallowed and hastened down the corridor. Stone eyes watched her enter, watched her move through the statues with mindful steps. She moved past, not seeing or not noticing. Her long brown hair passed inches from an outstretched claw, perfume wafting into the air. Then she was through the archway. In the darkness that remained in the gargoyle chamber, a figure stirred and stepped from its pedestal. It was the first time he had moved in 100 years. She glanced at the many wooden doors as she passed. Most were half rotted or hanging on one hinge. One doorway was empty, and she stopped to peer inside, careful not to enter. A wooden bed lay tilted against one wall, corded chains showing in the flickering torchlight. A shudder ran through her at the table's intended use. About to turn away, hot breath upon her cheek made her start. She jumped back and stared down the hall. No one. Darkness enveloped her as her torch went out. A force impacted her chest and drove her into a wall. She flailed, screaming as sharp claws dug into. With a shudder, she came to, finding herself staring at an empty hallway. Her torch was still in her hand. Lit. Her other hand moved to her jerkin and gripped the small pendant beneath. Her heart was trying to hammer its way out of her chest. Perhaps I should go back. Thoughts took over her mind. I can never go back. I'm trapped. And Tina, help me. I'll never find a way out of here. A single choked cry escaped her throat. A halting step took her towards the exit, a hand clutching at her chest, and she couldn't breathe. No. No! She wouldn't give in. She knew the path. She had mapped it in her mind long before coming here. She had the pendant. She would defy the ego of this place and prove it to be nothing. Stealing her will, she turned and forced her limbs to move. Her nerves relaxed. Her breathing cleared. She walked further into the keep, not giving any more of the rooms so much as a glance. He observed her reaction as the vision took her. Her face filled with horror. Her soul was breaking. But then it stopped. She shuddered and looked around, awareness returning to her. The most interesting female. He studied her as she struggled with despair, recovered, and continued down the hall. He liked to watch. It was never long before he took them, those who dared invade his master's home. But he took more time with those that interested him. This one did so a great deal more than the others, if only for her fortitude. He followed her in footsteps unheard and form unseen as she walked on into darkness. Her steps were light and careful along the path, noting the stones in her mind and avoiding certain steps. She peered over her shoulder now and again, feeling a pair of eyes lingering on her. It's just this place. But she could not shake the sense of being watched. Her mouth was parched. Continuous visions pulled at her mind. The eyes would not leave her. She whirled, straining her eyes to see what was not there. The empty hall stretched before her, stone and mold, and darkness. She stared for a long while. Something was wrong beyond the effects of this place. What was it? Her eyes came to rest on a particular spot, and a cold shiver ran up her spine. Something was there. Reaching into her satchel, she pulled out a smooth stone and drew it back, preparing to throw it into the space. She paused, thinking. Instead, she threw it hard into the corner above the spot. The rock hit the wall with a clack that echoed. It bounced up to the ceiling and fell into the spot, hitting the floor with another clack that immediately died away. She waited. Nothing. Walking over, she squatted, her eyes looking up at the something that wasn't there. She picked up the stone and replaced it in her satchel. He watched her walk over. The stone had barely missed him, and only because he moved as it fell. Her eyes stared directly into his, as though she could see him. He was not unnerved, but all the more intrigued. She stood, her eyes locked with his. "I know you're there." Her shaking voice cut through the silence. Her face was strained. She was afraid. That was good. Still, she had spoken. None before had spoken. They had only screamed and fled, or attempted to flee at least. She drew the dagger, its green blaze seeming to glow in the torchlight. She held it in front of her, its point aimed at him. She held it there, her knuckles white as she backed away, then turned and continued down the corridor. He followed, giving a little more distance. Something wasn't right. Her dagger remained at the ready, even as she pulled a parchment from her satchel. After glancing over its contents, she looked around the corridor and then ahead of her. She moved forward, tapping on the wall with the pommel of her dagger. Tink, 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 clack. She stopped and looked at the wall and tapped it again. Clack. She tapped the stone next to it, then on the other side. Clink, clink. Glancing at the parchment, she stuffed it back in her satchel and put 2 fingers from her dagger hand up to the wall. The stone was cold and lifeless. Even as she touched it, she felt movement on the other side. Her brow crinkled and she leaned in, pressing her ear to the stone. It was rough and dry, but ice cold. Ice touched her cheek. She pulled back only to feel fingers clamping down on her throat. The hands pulled at her, even as their icy grip squeezed her throat. Her eyes wide, she pushed off the wall with her foot and swung her dagger. The blade passed through shadowy arms, the grip remaining strong. The hands clamped down harder, choking her, crushing her. Spots formed in her eyes. The torch fell from her hand. This wasn't a vision. She was dying. Her mind faded, her thoughts becoming muddled. She collapsed to her knees, even as the hands continued to squeeze. Her mind faded into darkening fog as death took her. He watched her pause and stare blankly at the stone. Then she dropped her torch and went into a frenzy of blade swinging as she attempted to fend off whatever she saw attacking her. Her head tilted back, her eyes bulging as she appeared to choke. A smile touched his face. She was breaking. She sunk to her knees, her eyes going half-lidded. She was in her final throes of death. His smile turned down at this thought. She should live longer to understand the price of her trespass. Her eyes closed fully, and the creature that watched her turned away, jealousy stinging him. Before he could walk away, a green glow lit up the hall. He turned back, seeing the dagger gripped in her hand, glowing with a vibrant green light. Her breath came long and peaceful. How? The vision of this hall was the strongest. Should have killed her. His eyes went to the dagger. Slowly, she stood, her eyes remaining closed. The light of the dagger faded. She opened her eyes and looked around, surprise on her face. This was beyond intriguing. She should not have gotten this far. Anger mixed with fascination as she picked up her torch and moved to the wall, resuming her tapping. He noticed she was no longer looking around. Her actions were tight and hurried. Her hands were shaking. At least she was afraid. Finding what she was looking for, she pressed on a particular stone with the pommel of her dagger. The stone sunk into the wall. A rumbling and scraping was heard as the wall split, 2 sections separating from each other and sliding into the walls beside them. He stared. He did not know this place existed. Jade stared into the darkness of the room. Her body shook to enter. The last vision had nearly cost her her life. Could she turn back after having come so far? No. Escape screamed through her limbs, but she needed to get what she came for. She needed proof that she was here. Proof that the curse of Ixtus was a lie. Proof that she was alive. This was the final chamber. After getting her prize, she could flee. She could run home, be safe, and never return. Home, where death of this place could not follow her. Whatever was watching her, she would have to deal with eventually anyway. Perhaps she could fight her way free. Bolstering her will, she took a step into the doorway of the chamber. She stopped and wedged her dagger beneath the wall at the corner of the opening, then proceeded inside. The chamber was small, but held a treasure trove of glittering images set on pillars. Statues of monsters, undead creatures, and deities lined the walls. They were made of gold, silver, ruby, and other materials precious and rare. Just one item could bring her from poverty to the riches of a king. She passed them all. Her search led her to the stone statue of a dragon, its spherical jade eyes contrasting awkwardly with the dull gray stone. She pulled a pair of small tools from her satchel and set to work. It only took a few moments to remove the eyes from the statue. Once she had retrieved them, she wrapped them in her handkerchief and stuffed it and her tools into her satchel. She turned to leave when her eyes caught sight of something. A statue of a skeletal figure wrapped in a cloak of leaves stood on a pedestal of its own. The young woman's face turned down. She grabbed the statue and pulled it off the pedestal. It fell to the floor with a crash, shattering into 1,000 pieces. A roar at the entrance made her head snap. For a moment she saw a creature, large and gargoyle-like, standing beyond the doorway, gripping its arm. The monster was fading from sight. Her dagger lay on the ground beyond the doorway, which was closing. She darted for the entrance and dove across the threshold, the wall slamming shut behind her. Her hand gripped her dagger as she rolled to her feet. Her sense of this creature had not diminished. She swiped the air with her dagger. The blade scraped against something, and she heard a roar of pain as the creature reappeared. It was a gargoyle, like those she had seen in the chamber, yet twice as big. Even doubled over, holding its chest where she had injured it, it still towered over her. Two enormous bat-like wings flared on its back. A thick tail curled around itself. Its eyes looked as stone as the rest of it. Were it not for its movement and the roar coming from its open beak, she would have thought it a bizarre statue, still and lifeless. She wasted no time, bolting past it, even as it swiped a massive claw at her. Her boots pounded the stones, her heart thumped in her chest. Traps went off after her, missing her by narrow margins. One came up in time, grazing her cheek. She paid it no mind and kept running. The creature roared behind her, giving chase as it crashed through the spears and blades. She kept her eyes forward. The gargoyle chamber was ahead of her. She ran into it full on, forgetting the stories, thinking only of the living creature chasing her. The edge of a stone hand scratched her arm, tearing a hole in the sleeve of her tunic. She spun, grabbed her arm, and bumped into a statue. She tried to keep moving, but something pulled her hair. One of the statues, still and lifeless, gripped the end of her hair in its stone claw. She immediately grabbed her hair, cut the length of it with her dagger, and continued on with haste through this chamber. Another misstep, and the stone grip of another statue encased her arm. She struck the statue's arm with the pommel of her dagger, but it did not yield. She yelled in desperation, pulling and wriggling against the stony grip. She propped her foot against the thing's chest, but then another claw grabbed her ankle. "No! No!" she screamed. She looked into the hall. The one chasing her had not followed her in. She struck the statue's hand again and again. Upon one instance of drawing back, her hand hit something, and she felt a claw around her wrist. Fear drove breath from her, even as she felt a pair of stone arms embracing her midsection. A stone hand covered her mouth, and she held her face still. She kicked with her one free leg. It too became entrapped. A clawed hand held her throat. She writhed and struggled as the statues overwhelmed her, her muffled screams barely audible as tears fell down her cheeks. More hands enveloped her. Sight went from her, her eyes covered by a stone barrier. She gave a muffled scream that melted into blubbering. Her body was completely covered. Their mouths were on her. She silently begged anyone who might be listening not to let her die, even as she felt her air being cut off. Through her tears and her sobs, she heard the crunching of her bones. Yet she felt no pain, only the stone hands diminishing. She realized then it was not the crunching of bones she was hearing, but the crumbling of stone. After an impact beside her head, she was lifted up. The remaining claws fell away, the last being those on her face. She breathed in a sharp breath and fell into a fit of coughing. When she had recovered enough to control her body, she opened her eyes. The beaked face of the gargoyle that had been chasing her glared at her. Its eyes were stone, its body still. She wondered for the second time if this was merely another statue. He held her off the ground, his massive claw gripping her jerkin as her eyes met his. She managed the presence of mind to turn her head and look at the crumbled remains of the gargoyle statues that once filled the chamber, then looked back at him. You saved me? He merely stared at her. Thank you. He growled, a deep sound from far within him, and turned, carrying her back down the hall. Wait, she said, struggling against his grip. Where are you taking me? The silence of the keep was the only reply. You saved me. Why did you save me if you don't intend to let me go? He kept walking, kept staring. She kept struggling. Listen, I have gold and jewels. I can share them with you. He carried her into a room. Listen, she gripped his arm and wriggled. I can show you a place. I know of a castle nearby. He slammed her onto a table. She grunted and coughed, but continued to plead. I have many wishes. I can give you whatever you want. In quick movements, he put his beak to her face and breathed on her. She turned her head away with a cough and at the smell of the stale air. His voice was a deep growl. What I want, human female, is to watch you die, slowly, by my hand, for trespassing in my master's keep. Your master is dead. She still gripped his arm with her head turned away. The pleading was gone from her voice. He's not coming back this time. She was bold, much bolder than any that had come before. Moreover, she did not speak as one who was terrified. He paused only a moment. And what do you know of such things, little thief? She turned her head, her green eyes boring into his, though he knew she saw them only a stone. Didn't she? Because he was stabbed through the heart with a jade knife, the same knife that injured you. I know because I watched him die and turn to ash. I know because I'm the one who gladly shoved the blade into his chest. I'm the one who killed him, and I'll kill you just the same. He could only stare. Her glare was deadly. Her irises were the color of jade and seemed vibrant and glowing as they glowered at him. An unexplainable feeling coursed through his body. Was this fear? His grip tightened on her jerkin, his scowl deepening as he fought against the feeling and the sense that she was not lying. Who are you? He growled. Her glare did not diminish as her lips parted to speak a single word. Jade. The name released in him a volcano of fear, though he could not explain why. His grip loosened, and he pulled back his arm. The girl's foot came up and struck him in the underarm, hard enough that he felt it, though he shouldn't have. And he reacted in anger, slamming her back onto the table, even as she attempted to flee. He then pulled up her arms and locked them in shackles. She struggled and fought, screaming at him, clawing with her nails, kicking with her feet, until at last he had secured her four limbs and backed away. She continued to struggle against her bonds. She did not look at him again, as if she had forgotten he was there. He stared at her, trying to recognize her, trying to discern why her name so terrified him, and how she could know the details of the death of his master hundreds of years before. He turned and walked out of the room. Jade stewed, fighting through her anger and fear. She tried to come up with a plan of escape. She wriggled her right wrist, testing the play. There was some, but not much. She tested her left wrist and noticed something odd. It was as if there was something in the end of her sleeve. Her fingertips explored around the cuff and found an opening. Sticking her finger inside, she felt a small metal object. A little maneuvering, and she had the object in her hand. It appeared to be something halfway between a pin and a key. She furrowed her brow as she looked at it in the... With what light was she seeing? Her eyes searched the room. It was dusty and old. Various contraptions lay covered in thick dust, while others lay half collapsed. She saw no source of light yet. Somehow, could see. After a moment trying to figure it out, she gave up and went back to the object. A thought occurred to her. Angling it down, she tapped it against the shackle. Nothing. She dragged the end of the object around the shackle, trying to imagine what use the thing could have once held, when it caught on something. Fingers adjusted and it sunk into the shackle. Small vibrations ran down the tool as it knocked against something movable inside. Only I knew what I was doing. The heavy tome slammed onto the table, raising a cloud of dust and dry mold. None of it affected him as he opened the book to the first page. Much of his master's library was gone, turned to dust long ago, but this was his most prized book. His master took care to form it completely of leather, each page a thin slice of skin, perhaps animal, but most likely not. His master had told him of it long ago, for he was the keep's prime protector. It was a book his master had scribed in the outset of his dark path, when he had visions of his many deaths to come. The loyal gargoyle flipped the pages, examining each foretelling. Each picture displayed his master facing off against a different being, those that had killed him. Little did they know their strength and prowess had been meaningless. Each time his master rose with more power than he had before. He reached the last page and reared at what he saw. Etched into the aged leather was a picture of his master rising up like a wave of darkness, ready to crash down on the creature below him. The creature was a human girl, similar in appearance to that of the girl now held prisoner in the torture chamber. Her face was set in a scowl. In her hand she held a dagger. Excuse me. All the etchings had been just that, etchings into the leather, containing shade but no color. It was the same here, with one exception. The girl's dagger, which was being thrust towards the center of his master's chest, glowed with the color of jade. His eyes moved to the text beneath the picture. A human woman named Jade. Long have I suspected this material to be formed from the lifeblood of Silverine. But I fear it is more than that. It is something about the woman and the dagger. They are counter to my being. The dagger's touch is harmful to me, and all that my hands have made. To be slain by it is to meet my permanent end. She will stab me in the center of my chest in payment for the unborn child I will take from her womb. My body will burn with green embers as the life of the jade consumes me, leaving only ash. My visions do not continue. I believe this will be my final end, but I will find a way. I will use the life of this thief, this wielder of jade, and I will return in ultimate power to be one with death and to never die again. You, my pet, do not try to kill her. She will destroy you just as she kills me. Her touch will harm you, and her blade will destroy you. Let her leave. She is mine. And once when she faces me, never will she be able to escape me. He stared at the page. He felt the memory had been locked away by his master, but seeing the page and reading the script was like a key turning a lock, and the memory came flooding back. The woman entered, wielding a dagger of jade. He obeyed his master's words, not touching her, only observing from a distance. He watched as she entered his master's treasury, a place he did not know existed, and drew out his master by destroying his artifacts with only her jade dagger. His master appeared in a cloud of darkness and reared up, preparing to feed on her life essence. They struck simultaneously. It was a blinding green light and the scream of his master's soul as his essence was ripped from his body. The green light faded, his master's ashes fell, and the woman turned to face him, her body composed entirely of jade. She marched toward him, her jade eyes boring into him, seeing him through his cloaked state. He backed away in abject fear of one that did what no other could do, destroy his master forever. She herded him into the gargoyle chamber. All the statues turned away from her, their faces and heads covered by stony hands, in poses of cowardice and fear. She backed him into a corner, and he cowered like the many beings he had tortured and killed, his body convulsing. A jade hand reached out, her palm touching his brow. Pain like the heat of an iron, searing his mind and filling his body with flame. His roar faded into blackness, faded into sleep, until he awoke, alone, and back on his pedestal, knowing only that his master was dead, and he awaited his return. The gargoyle took a step back from the table, staring at the book before turning his gaze to the doorway. The woman he now held prisoner was not made of jade, nor did her touch harm him, though her attacks did. She wielded a jade dagger, had knowledge of his master's death, and spoke as one who witnessed it. Perhaps it was her. Her power somehow weakened. But then why come back here? He slapped his tail against the stone in annoyance. Such questions had no answers. He was not going to waste his time with them. Her touch did not harm him, but she was still an intruder. She was still dangerous to his master and to him. His master gave him instructions, final instructions. He would see them carried out. And then a tremor ran through his body. If his master was truly gone forever, what did that mean for him? But he could not think of that. Not now. Now he had purpose. Now he had an intruder to deal with. Now there was only obedience. Jade worked the lock, her wrists sore and her fingers cramping. She had a rough idea in her head of what the inside of the lock looked like. She just found the right combination of movements. Click! The shackle opened. Jade's eyes widened and her mouth spread into a grin. She laughed as she wriggled her arm free, and then reached over to the shackle on her other wrist. A massive claw wrapped around her free arm. She shuddered and saw the gargoyle glaring down at her. Her arm twisted and strained, but his grip held firm. He wrapped another claw around her throat and squeezed just enough to make her feel the strength in his hand. Attack me, and I will crush your neck, he told her. Understand? Jade nodded. The gargoyle removed his hand from her wrist and reached behind the table. There was an audible click, and the 3 shackles popped open. Jade felt herself being lifted by her neck and carried out of the room. The gargoyle glared at her as they moved down the hall. Jade tried to speak, to ask him where he was taking her, but he was squeezing her neck too tight for her to speak. She felt like she shouldn't be able to breathe, yet somehow she could. Barely. Instead, she stared back at those stone eyes, feeling more and more as if she knew him, or she could feel his thoughts. Her hand itched to move. She allowed it, keeping her compulsion tightly leashed, making her movements slow. Just needed to touch her palm to his forehead. A whisper blew past them, and both froze in their tracks. He half turned to face back down the hall. Her heart sank. She wanted to curl into a ball to hide from some unknown threat. No, she whispered. The gargoyle turned his head towards her. You have failed, woman of Jade. My master has returned. Yeah, I'm going to pause here, guys, because I just got a message from Dave Chesson. So we're going to see what's going on. So just hang tight. Well, guys, I'm not sure if I should continue this or if we should go on an interview with Dave Chesson. Anybody in the live chat? Nope. Well, it's kind of hard to think with the camera on, isn't it? So, let me stop screen sharing. Let's get that off there. No, that's not it. It is. There we go. I think we'll postpone for another time. Maybe that's the right choice. I don't know. But we're just going to end there. So if you want the rest of the story, go online. It's only $1. Tell me what you think of this reading. It wasn't the best, obviously. It wasn't professional, but sorry, it's hot in here. Go check it out, Cryos Jade, and check out Dave Cheston's stuff as well. Kindlepreneur. Just do a search for it. If you misspelled, the Google will correct it. And I guess that's it. So until next time, keep reading, keep writing.